March 2, 1943. The cattle truck jerked to a stop and Carl Weiss tasted blood where he'd bitten his tongue. "Out, Rouse, move it!" The door slammed open. Sunlight blinded him. Carl stumbled down the ramp with 200 other German prisoners, their boots hitting Texas dirt for the first time. The air was different here, thick, hot even in early March. It smelled like grass and diesel and something else he couldn't name. Freedom, maybe. Or just a different kind of cage. Form up 3 lines. Carl found himself standing between Ernst Becker, a schoolteacher from Frankfurt, and a kid named Wolfgang, who couldn't be older than 19. The boy was shaking. They'd spent 4 days on a train from New York, locked in cars designed for livestock, pissing in buckets, eating cold rations twice a day. Before that, 18 days on a cargo ship across the Atlantic, packed so tight in the hold that men slept standing up. "We're going to die here," Wolfgang whispered. "They're going to line us up and shoot us. My brother told me. He said the Americans execute prisoners in Texas because nobody's watching." "Shut up," Ernst hissed. "Your brother's an idiot. He's SS." "That proves my point." Carl said nothing. He was watching the guards, 12 of them, rifles slung casual over their shoulders. Not pointing, not aimed, just carried. Like they were going hunting later and couldn't be bothered to put the guns away first. One guard was eating an apple. Another was talking to his buddy about somebody named Betty, who apparently couldn't dance worth a damn. They weren't acting like executioners. A man in an officer's uniform walked toward them. Late 30s, clean-shaven, the kind of face that looked like it smiled often, but wasn't smiling now. He stopped 10 feet from the front line and pulled out a clipboard. "My name is First Lieutenant William Stark," he said in German. Slow, careful German with an American accent that made the words sound too soft. "Welcome to Camp Hearne, Texas. You are prisoners of war under the protection of the Geneva Convention. You will be housed, fed, and treated according to international law. You will work. You will be paid. You will follow orders. You will not be harmed unless you attempt escape or violence. Are there any questions?" Nobody moved. Carl felt Wolfgang shaking harder beside him. Stark waited 5 seconds, then nodded. "Good. Follow Corporal Mitchell to your barracks. Dinner is at 1800 hours. Don't be late." He turned and walked away. Ernst leaned toward Carl. "Did he just say we'd be paid? I heard it too." "That's not possible. That's not how prisoners work." But Corporal Mitchell was already waving them forward. "Come on, boys. Let's get you settled before it gets hotter than Satan's asshole out here." He had a grin that showed too many teeth and an accent so thick Carl could barely understand the English. "Name's Bobby Mitchell. Oklahoma born and raised. Y'all speak English?" Silence. "No, well, hell, we'll fix that. Follow me." They marched through the camp in a stumbling column. Carl tried to take it all in. Rows of wooden barracks stretching in every direction. A mess hall. A building with a red cross painted on the roof. Guard towers at the corners. Yes, but the guards in them were sitting down reading newspapers. One was asleep. "Here we go, Barrack 7. Home sweet home." Mitchell pushed open the door. 40 men to a building. You got beds, you got a stove for winter, you got windows that open. Toilets and showers are in the building behind this one. We ain't savages. Carl stepped inside. The first thing he saw was the beds. Actual beds. Metal frames bolted to the floor, thin mattresses on top, 2 folded blankets on each one. Electric bulbs hanging from the ceiling. A potbelly stove in the center. Windows with glass that wasn't broken. Ernst walked to the nearest bed and touched the mattress like it might disappear. "This is better than my barracks in the Wehrmacht," he said. "No, it's not," Wolfgang said. "It's a trick. They're going to take it away." "Why would they give it to us just to take it away?" "To break us, to make us weak." Mitchell was still standing in the doorway. "Y'all gonna stand there all day, or you gonna pick bunks, Because dinner's in 3 hours, and you look like you ain't eaten since Roosevelt was a baby. Carl chose a bed near the window. He sat down slowly. The mattress compressed under his weight. Not much, but enough. He put his hands on his knees and stared at the floor. This wasn't supposed to happen. Prisoners weren't supposed to have beds. Prisoners were supposed to sleep on concrete, or dirt, or nothing at all. That's what German camps did. That's what the SS did to the Russians. That's what happened in war. Hey, Fritz. Mitchell was looking at him. You okay? You look like you seen a ghost. Carl didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Concern. Actual concern. He nodded. Mitchell grinned again. Good. Because you're gonna need your strength. We got a whole lot of work for y'all, and it pays 80 cents a day. Better than what I make, and I gotta carry a gun. That night, Carl lay on his bunk and listened to the sounds of the camp settling. Men coughing, someone crying quietly, the wind against the roof. An American guard walking past outside, humming something that might have been a song. Carl, Ernst whispered from the bunk below. Are you awake? Yes. Why are they doing this? I don't know. It doesn't make sense. We're the enemy. We killed their soldiers. They should hate us. Carl closed his eyes. Maybe they do. Maybe this is just what hate looks like in America. But he didn't believe that, and he could tell Ernst didn't either. Dinner had been the second shock. They'd lined up at 1800 hours, like Stark ordered, expecting watery soup and stale bread. Instead, the mess hall served beef stew with potatoes and carrots. Fresh bread that was still warm. Coffee. An apple for dessert. Carl had stared at his tray for 30 seconds before Ernst elbowed him. Eat it before they change their minds. What if it's poisoned? Then we die with full stomachs. The American guards ate the same food from the same kitchen. Carl watched them looking for signs of deception. But they just ate and talked and laughed the way soldiers everywhere did when they weren't being shot at. Bobby Mitchell sat down at the end of their table with his own tray. How's the grub cooks from Louisiana? Makes a mean gumbo, but his stew's pretty good too. Carl took a bite. The meat was tender, seasoned with black pepper. The potatoes were real, not the powdered shit they'd eaten in Tunisia. He felt his throat close up and had to force himself to swallow. I think he likes it, Mitchell said to another guard. Look at his face. Boy's about to cry. Leave him alone, Bobby. I ain't being mean. I'm just saying, when's the last time these boys had a decent meal? Probably since before Africa. He was right. Carl couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten like this. Real food. Hot food. Food that didn't taste like rust and desperation. That night in the barracks, someone started singing. Quietly at first. A folk song from Bavaria, something about mountains and home. Other voices joined in. Not loud, not defiant. Just men singing because they were alive and warm and fed, and for tonight, that was enough. In the morning, reveille sounded at 0600 hours. They assembled in the yard between the barracks, 4,000 German prisoners in ragged uniforms, standing at attention while Major Philip Gage reviewed them from a small platform. He was older than Stark, maybe late 40s with gray at his temples and the posture of someone who'd carried authority so long he'd forgotten it was heavy. Gentlemen, Gage said, and the translator repeated it in German. Carl flinched. Nobody had called him a gentleman in 2 years. You are soldiers who fought honorably and surrendered when defeat was certain. The United States Army respects that. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will work, you will eat, you will maintain discipline, and you will conduct yourselves with the dignity befitting your rank and service. Gage paused. His eyes moved across the assembled prisoners, not over them, but at them like he was looking for something. You may believe you are our enemies. In the strictest sense you are. But you are also human beings far from home. And this is America. We don't forget that. Not ever. After the assembly, they were divided into work details. Carl's group was assigned to agricultural labor, 20 prisoners, 2 guards loaded into the back of a truck and driven out into the Texas countryside. The farm belonged to a man named Hector Ramirez. 60 years old, weathered brown skin hands that looked like they'd been carved from wood. He walked along the line of prisoners studying each one, then pointed at Carl. You look smart. Come here." Carl stepped forward. Ramirez showed him the irrigation system. Pipes running from a well to ditches between rows of cotton. "The valve gets stuck sometimes. You gotta hit it right here with a wrench. Not too hard. Just enough to remind it who's boss. Understand?" Carl nodded. "You speak English." "Small," Carl managed. "I learn in school. Not good." "Better than my German." Ramirez handed him the wrench. "You'll pick it up. Language is just practice." He turned to the rest of the prisoners. "Y'all are gonna help me harvest cotton. It's hard work, but I pay fair and I don't tolerate laziness. We clear?" Nobody answered. I said, "Are we clear?" "Yes," Ernst called out. "We understand." "Good. Let's get to it." They worked until noon when the sun turned the fields into an oven. Ramirez called a break and brought out sandwiches, ham and cheese on white bread, a thermos of sweet tea so cold it made Carl's teeth ache. "Where you from in Germany?" Ramirez asked, sitting under a live oak tree. "Bavaria, small village. We make bread." "Baker, huh?" Ramirez took a long drink from his canteen. "My wife makes bread. Sourdough. Takes her 3 days to get the starter right." He looked at Carl. "You miss it. Baking." Carl didn't know how to answer in English, so he just nodded. "Yeah, I bet you do." Ramirez was quiet for a moment, watching the other prisoners eat. "My son's in North Africa right now, 1st Armored Division. He writes letters, but they're all censored to hell. I don't know what he's seen. I don't know if he's..." He stopped. "He's probably shooting at boys like you." Carl felt his stomach twist. "I am sorry." "For what? Being German?" "That ain't your fault. War ain't personal. It's just geography and bad luck." Ramirez stood up. "Break's over. Let's get back to it." That night, Carl wrote his first letter home. They gave him paper and a pencil in the recreation hall. Told him he could write 1 page front and back and it would be censored before being mailed. He sat at a long wooden table under electric lights that didn't flicker, trying to think of what to say. "Dear Mama, I am alive. I am in America, in a place called Texas. I am not hurt. I am not hungry. Please tell Papa I am safe. They treat us well here. Better than I expected. Better than I deserve. I work on a farm and they pay me. Can you believe that they pay prisoners? I think about you every day. I think about home. I hope you are safe. I hope the war has not touched you. I will come home when this is over. I promise. Your son Carl." He folded the letter and gave it to the guard at the desk. The guard glanced at it, stamped it, and dropped it in a box marked "Outgoing Mail." "Takes about 6 weeks to get to Germany," the guard said. "Maybe longer, depends on the convoy routes." "Thank you." The guard looked surprised. "You're welcome, Fritz." Weeks turned into months. The rhythm of the camp became routine. Work at dawn, return at sunset. Dinner at 1800 hours, recreation until 2100, lights out at 2200. Carl's English improved. He learned words like wrench and cotton and rattlesnake. He learned that Bobby Mitchell had a wife named Sarah and a daughter named Amy who was learning to read. He learned that Hector Ramirez's son had been wounded near Kasserine Pass, but survived. "Same place where you got captured," Ramirez said one afternoon. They were repairing a fence post. "Small world." "I did not shoot him," Carl said quickly. "I know. You were probably hiding in a ditch trying not to die." "Yes." Ramirez hammered the post into the ground. "That's what most soldiers do. Hide and try not to die. The ones who don't are either heroes or idiots, and there ain't much difference between the two." In August, new prisoners arrived from Sicily. 300 men who'd surrendered after the invasion. They brought news that Italy was collapsing, that Mussolini had been deposed, that German forces were retreating north. One of the new prisoners, a corporal named Klaus Fischer, found Carl in the mess hall. "You've been here since March." "Yes." "Then you don't know what they're saying back home." Klaus leaned closer, his voice dropping. "They're saying you're traitors, that prisoners in America are living better than civilians in Germany, that you have food and safety while our families are being bombed every night." Carl felt his face burn. "We didn't choose this." "I know that, but they don't. They think you surrendered because you wanted the easy life." "There's nothing easy about being a prisoner." Klaus looked at his tray. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, a roll. "Isn't there—" That night, Carl couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about his mother in Bavaria, about the village, about the people he'd known his whole life scraping by on rations while he ate 3 meals a day in Texas. The guilt sat in his chest like a stone. "You're thinking too much," Ernst said from below. "I can hear you thinking. They're right to call us traitors." "No, they're not. We're alive, Carl. We surrendered so we could survive. There's no shame in that." "Isn't there?" Ernst was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I taught history for 12 years. You know what I learned? That every war eventually ends, and when it does, people need to rebuild. We can't rebuild if we're dead." By December 1944, the war news was impossible to ignore. The Allies had landed in Normandy in June. Paris had been liberated in August. The Red Army was pushing west through Poland. Germany was being squeezed from both sides, and everyone knew it. In Camp Hearne, tensions rose. The hardcore Nazis among the prisoners started getting bolder. They held secret meetings in the barracks after lights out. They threatened anyone who spoke English too well, or worked too willingly, or talked about going home instead of going back to fight. One night, Carl was walking back from the latrine when 3 men grabbed him. "English lover," one of them hissed. It was Hermann Vogel, a former SS officer who'd been captured in Italy. "We've been watching you, talking to the Americans, smiling at them, learning their language. I'm just trying to survive. You're collaborating." Vogel shoved him against the barracks wall. "You're forgetting who you are, what you are. I'm a prisoner. You're a German soldier. I'm a baker from Bavaria who got conscripted and sent to die in Africa. That's what I am." Vogel hit him, not hard enough to knock him down, but hard enough to split his lip. "Say that again, and next time it'll be worse. We're watching you, Weiss. Don't forget which side you're on." They walked away, leaving Carl leaning against the wall, blood on his chin. Ernst found him there 5 minutes later. "Jesus Christ. Was it Vogel?" "Yes." "We need to tell the guards." "No." "Carl, they'll kill you if this keeps up. There's been 3 beatings this month already. The Americans know something's happening, but nobody will talk." "I'm not a rat." "You're an idiot." Ernst pulled out a handkerchief and handed it to Carl. "Here, your lip's bleeding." Carl pressed the cloth to his mouth. It came away red. "What are we supposed to do, Ernst? We're German. Those are German soldiers in there. How do we tell the Americans that our own people are worse than the guards?" "By opening your mouth and using words." But Carl couldn't, not yet. Because Vogel was right about one thing: you didn't forget which side you were on, even if your side had forgotten what sides were supposed to mean. The next day, Bobby Mitchell noticed the bruise on Carl's face. "Rough night." "I fell." "Uh-huh, you fell. And I'm the Queen of England." Mitchell leaned against the truck. They were heading out to Ramirez's farm for the day. "Look, Fritz, I ain't stupid. I know there's trouble in the barracks. I know some of you boys ain't too happy about how things are going. But here's the thing: we can't help if nobody talks. So if you or your buddy Ernst ever want to tell me something, my door's open. Figuratively speaking, I don't actually have a door. I have a tent." Carl looked at him. really looked. Mitchell was maybe 25 years old, farm boy from Oklahoma who probably joined up right after Pearl Harbor. He had a kind face, the kind of face that belonged on someone's brother or cousin or friend. "Why do you care?" Carl asked. "About what?" "About us. About prisoners. We are enemy." Mitchell was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My daddy told me something once. He said Bobby hates easy. Any fool can hate. But it takes a bigger man to see past the uniform and remember there's a person underneath. Y'all are just boys who got dealt a bad hand. Same as my son might be someday if this war keeps going. So yeah, I care. Sue me." That night, Major Gage called a special assembly. 4,000 prisoners standing in the cold December wind while Gage stood on his platform, looking tired. "I know many of you are following the news from Europe," he said through the translator. "I know you're worried about your families, your comrades, your homeland. I want you to know that regardless of what happens in that war, your treatment here will not change. You will continue to be housed, fed, and cared for according to the law. That is not conditional on military outcomes. It is a principle." He paused and something in his face shifted, almost like a smile. "I also want to tell you that Christmas is coming. And in Texas, Christmas is a big deal. We're working on something special this year. Something I think you'll appreciate. More details to follow. Dismissed." The prisoners filed back to their barracks in confused silence. "What does that mean?" Wolfgang asked. He'd grown up in the last year and a half, less afraid now, more hardened. "Something special. Extra rations, maybe. Someone suggested. A church service. A movie." Ernst looked at Carl. "What do you think?" Carl touched his split lip, still tender from Vogel's punch. He thought about Bobby Mitchell's words, about Hector Ramirez sharing his lunch, about Major Gage saying gentleman like he meant it. "I think," Carl said slowly, "that these Americans keep surprising us. And I don't know if that's wonderful or terrifying." "Can't it be both?" Carl smiled despite everything. "Yes, I think it probably is." 3 weeks until Christmas. 3 weeks until whatever Major Gage had planned. 3 weeks until Carl Weiss would stand under a Texas sky and realize that everything he'd been taught about enemies and hatred and war was about to change forever. But he didn't know that yet. Nobody did. They just waited and wondered and tried to survive one more day in a prison that felt less like punishment and more like a question they didn't know how to answer. December 3rd, 1944. The temperature dropped to 42 degrees overnight, which by Texas standards might as well have been the Arctic. Carl woke to frost on the inside of the barracks windows and Ernst cursing softly from the bunk below. "I thought Texas was supposed to be hot." "It is," Carl said, pulling both blankets around his shoulders. "Except when it isn't." Outside, Bobby Mitchell was walking between the barracks with a clipboard, his breath making clouds in the cold air. He stopped at their door and knocked, which was unusual. Guards didn't usually knock. "You all decent in there?" "We're wearing clothes, if that's what you're asking," Ernst called back. Mitchell pushed the door open. "Major Gage wants work details suspended for today. Farmers can't work in this cold anyway, ground's too hard. So we're doing something different." He grinned. "We're decorating." "Decorating what?" Carl asked. "The camp. For Christmas. Major's orders. Says if we're gonna do this thing, we're gonna do it right. So grab your coats and meet in the yard in 20 minutes. And Fritz, tell your Nazi friends to play nice, or they'll spend Christmas in isolation. We clear?" Carl nodded. After Mitchell left, Ernst sat up. "Did he just say we're decorating for Christmas?" "That's what he said. We're prisoners. Prisoners don't decorate." "Apparently these ones do." Wolfgang appeared from the back of the barracks, his face pale. "Vogel's not going to like this. He's already angry about the assembly. He says Gage is trying to make us soft." "Vogel can go to hell," Ernst said. "I'm cold, I'm tired, And if the Americans want to hang up some pine branches and sing songs, I'm not going to complain. But Carl saw the fear in Wolfgang's eyes and knew it wasn't that simple. Every act of kindness from the Americans made Vogel and his followers more dangerous. Because kindness was the enemy of ideology. You couldn't hate someone who was feeding you housing, treating you like a human being. And if you couldn't hate, then what had all the dying been for? In the yard, 2 trucks had arrived carrying wooden crates. American soldiers were unloading them, while prisoners watched from a distance, unsure what to do. Major Gage stood on his platform again, hands behind his back. "Gentlemen, as promised, we're doing something special this year. In these crates, you'll find decorations, lights, pine garland, and materials for making wreaths. Over the next 3 weeks, you're going to help us turn this camp into something that looks like Christmas." Why? Because Christmas matters. Because even in the middle of a war, we remember what we're fighting for. And what we're fighting for is the right to celebrate, to gather, to be human together. The translator repeated it in German. Carl watched the faces around him. Some looked confused, others suspicious. A few were smiling despite themselves. "Now I know some of you are thinking this is propaganda," Gage continued. "That we're trying to break your spirit or make you forget your soldiers. Let me be clear, this is not propaganda. This is tradition. This is Texas. And in Texas we don't do Christmas halfway. So you can participate or you can stay in your barracks, but either way, this is happening." Questions? Silence. Good. Lieutenant Stark will organize the work crews. Let's get started. Within an hour, the camp had transformed into something Carl had never seen before. Prisoners and guards working side by side, stringing lights between barracks, weaving pine branches into garland, building wooden frames for decorations. The Americans brought out ladders and tools. They showed the prisoners how to make wreaths from wire and greenery. They played music from a radio someone had set up near the mess hall, country songs and Christmas carols, mixing with German folk tunes that some of the prisoners started humming. Bobby Mitchell handed Carl a hammer and a box of nails. "You're gonna help me hang these lights on the mess hall. Think you can manage that without electrocuting yourself?" "I will try not to die." That's the spirit? They worked for 2 hours, Mitchell on the ladder passing down strings of lights while Carl secured them to hooks along the roofline. It was mindless work, the kind that let your thoughts wander. Carl found himself thinking about home, about Christmas in Bavaria when he was a boy. His mother baking stollen in the kitchen. His father closing the bakery early on Christmas Eve so they could go to church together. The smell of cinnamon and candle wax. "You got quiet," Mitchell said from above. "Thinking about home?" "Yes." "Yeah, me too." Mitchell climbed down the ladder and stood next to Carl, both of them looking at the half-finished lights. "My wife writes that Amy asked Santa to bring me home for Christmas. She's 6. Still believes in all that magic stuff. Sarah had to tell her that Santa can't reach soldiers overseas, that I'd be home when I'm home." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you tell a 6-year-old about war?" Carl didn't know how to answer in English, so he just said, "I am sorry." "Not your fault, Fritz. You didn't start this mess." Mitchell picked up the ladder. "Come on, let's finish this before my fingers fall off." By evening, the camp looked different. Lights hung from every building, not turned on yet, but promising. Wreaths decorated the doors. Pine garland wrapped around fence posts. It wasn't Bavaria, and it wasn't Oklahoma, but it was something. A hybrid. A compromise between 2 worlds that were supposed to be enemies. Carl was walking back to his barracks when Hermann Vogel stepped out from between 2 buildings. "Having fun, Weiss?" Carl stopped. "I'm following orders." "You're collaborating, playing their game, forgetting that we're at war." "The war's over, Hermann. We lost. We're just waiting for everyone else to admit it." Vogel moved closer. 3 other men appeared behind him. Carl recognized them all, former SS, all true believers. "The war's not over until the Führer says it's over. And when we win, when the Reich rises again, Collaborators like you will be remembered. Your name will be written down. Your family will know what you did here. My family knows I'm alive. That's what matters. Is it? Vogel's smile was cold. I wonder what your mother would think if she knew you were hanging Christmas lights with the enemy. If she knew you'd given up. That you'd rather play house with Americans than fight for your country. Carl felt rage building in his chest, hot and sudden. My country sent me to die in Africa for a madman's dream. My country is starving while we eat 3 meals a day. My country is losing Herman, and you're too proud or too stupid to see it. He knew the punch was coming, but he didn't dodge. Vogel's fist caught him in the stomach, doubling him over. The other men grabbed his arms, holding him up, while Vogel hit him again, this time in the face. Blood filled Carl's mouth. Next time I won't stop, Vogel hissed. Next time I'll make sure you don't get up. They dropped him and walked away. Carl lay in the dirt, tasting copper, staring at the darkening sky. Stars were coming out. The same stars that hung over Bavaria. The same stars that had watched empires rise and fall for millennia. Carl, Jesus Christ. Ernst was pulling him to his feet, checking his face. We're telling Mitchell. Right now. This has gone too far. No. Yes. You hear me? Yes. Because if we don't stop this, someone's going to die. Maybe you. Maybe Wolfgang. Maybe some kid who just wants to go home. Carl spat blood. If I tell I'm a traitor. If you don't tell you're dead, which do you prefer? They found Bobby Mitchell outside the guards' quarters smoking a cigarette and talking to another soldier about football. Mitchell took one look at Carl's face, and his expression hardened. Who did this? Hermann Vogel, Ernst said before Carl could stop him. And 3 others, former SS. They've been beating anyone who cooperates with the Americans. This is the 3rd time this week. Mitchell flicked his cigarette away. Come with me. They walked to Major Gage's office, a small building near the main gate. Gage was at his desk, reading reports by lamplight. He looked up when they entered, and his eyes went immediately to Carl's face. Sit down, he said quietly. Tell me everything. Carl told him. About Vogel. About the threats. About the secret meetings and the intimidation and the growing divide in the camp between those who wanted to survive and those who wanted to keep fighting a war that was already lost. Ernst filled in details. Mitchell added observations. When they finished, Gage sat back in his chair and was silent for a long moment. How many men are in Vogel's group? Maybe 20, Ernst said. Maybe 30. It's hard to know. Some support him quietly. And the rest of the camp? Most just want to be left alone. They want to work, eat, sleep, and go home when this is over. But they're afraid. Vogel tells them that collaborators will be punished after the war, that their names are being recorded, that the Reich will rise again and settle accounts. Gage nodded slowly. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to call an assembly. I'm going to make it very clear that violence will not be tolerated, that anyone engaging in intimidation or assault will be placed in isolation indefinitely, that this camp is governed by law, not by ideology, and then Vogel and his inner circle are going to be transferred to a different facility, one with higher security and less freedom. He'll say you're punishing him for being loyal to Germany, Carl said. Let him say whatever he wants. He can believe in the Führer until Judgment Day for all I care, but he can't beat other prisoners. That's not negotiable. Gage looked at Carl. You did the right thing coming here. I know it wasn't easy. My mother would not agree. Your mother isn't here, and if she were, I think she'd rather have a living son who told the truth than a dead one who kept quiet. Gage stood. Mitchell, take these men to the hospital. Get that face looked at. Then, get them something hot to eat and make sure they sleep in a safe location tonight. I don't want any retaliation before I can deal with Vogel. Carl spent that night in a small room near the hospital, Ernst in the bunk next to him, a guard stationed outside the door. His face throbbed, his ribs ached, but for the first time in weeks, he slept without fear. The assembly the next morning was tense. 4,000 prisoners standing in formation, while Gage spoke in a voice that carried across the entire yard. Yesterday, several prisoners were assaulted by other prisoners for cooperating with camp regulations. Let me be absolutely clear about this. I don't care what your politics are. I don't care what flag you salute. I don't care if you think Hitler is a god or a monster. What I care about is order. What I care about is following the law. And the law says that prisoners of war will be treated humanely and will not harm each other. Anyone who violates that law will be removed from this camp permanently. Are we understood? The translator repeated it. Carl watched Vogel standing 3 rows ahead, rigid and furious. Effective immediately, 32 prisoners are being transferred to a maximum security facility in New Mexico. They will be transported this afternoon. The rest of you will continue as normal. Work details resume tomorrow. Christmas preparations continue. And anyone who has information about future violence is encouraged to report it without fear of retaliation. Dismissed. Within hours, trucks arrived. Guards escorted Vogel and his followers to the vehicles, their few possessions in canvas bags. Vogel looked back once as he climbed into the truck, his eyes finding Carl in the crowd. The message was clear: this isn't over. But for now, it was. That evening, Carl returned to his regular barracks. The other prisoners looked at him differently now, some with respect, others with suspicion, a few with outright hostility. Ernst stayed close, a silent guardian. Wolfgang approached him after dinner. "Thank you." "For what?" "For standing up to him. Vogel told me I had to inform on you, that if I didn't report everything you said and did, I'd be a traitor too. I've been terrified for weeks. You could have told someone." "I was scared. I still am. What happens when we go back to Germany? What happens when people find out we lived well here while they suffered?" Carl touched the bruise on his face. "I don't know, but I know that surviving isn't a crime. And I know that if we let fear control us, Vogel wins even from New Mexico." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. The camp transformed day by day. Prisoners built a wooden stage near the mess hall for Christmas performances. They carved decorations from scrap wood. They practiced songs, both German and American, preparing for some kind of concert that Lieutenant Stark was organizing. The Americans brought in a record player and taught some of the prisoners how to dance, which resulted in a lot of stumbling and laughter, and men trying to remember what joy felt like. Hector Ramirez visited the camp on December 18th. He found Carl repairing a broken string of lights and sat down next to him without saying anything for a while. "Heard you had some trouble." "Yes. Mitchell told me what happened. Said you stood up to some bad men. That takes guts." Carl shrugged. "It was necessary. Still takes guts." Ramirez pulled out a thermos of coffee and 2 cups. He poured one for Carl. "My son came home last week. Got leave for Christmas. He's wounded, but he's alive. I asked him what it was like over there, in Europe. You know what he said?" "What?" "He said he met German prisoners after the Normandy invasion. Said they looked relieved to be captured. Said some of them were crying because they thought they'd finally be executed, and instead they got fed. He said it made him think about what kind of war we're fighting, about who the real enemy is." Carl sipped the coffee. It was hot and bitter and perfect. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the enemy is always the men giving orders, not the men following them. And I told him about you boys here, about how you work hard and don't complain and just want to go home. I told him you're not so different from him. He is hero, I am prisoner. You're both soldiers who got dealt different hands, that's all. Hero and coward, it's just which side wins in the end." Ramirez stood up, knees popping. "Anyway, I brought something for you. Consider it an early Christmas present." He handed Carl a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a book, a German-English dictionary. "Figured you could use some help with the language. My wife found it at a used bookstore in Houston. It's old, but it's still good." Carl felt his throat tighten. "I cannot pay you." Didn't ask you to. It's a gift. That's how gifts work. Ramirez smiled. Merry Christmas, Carl. See you after the holiday. Carl sat there long after Ramirez left, holding the dictionary like it was made of gold. It was just a book. Just words on paper. But it represented something bigger, the belief that he had a future. That he would need English after the war. That someone thought he was worth investing in. Ernst found him there an hour later, still sitting in the same spot. What's that? A gift. Ernst looked at the book, then at Carl's face. You're crying. No, I'm not. You absolutely are. Carl wiped his eyes. I don't understand these people, Ernst. I don't understand why they're kind to us, why they care, why they give us gifts and treat us like we matter. Maybe that's just who they are. Maybe that's what winning looks like when you're on the right side. Are they on the right side? Ernst sat down next to him. I don't know, but I know that Hermann Vogel was wrong. And I know that Major Gage is trying to be decent in a world that doesn't require decency. That has to count for something. On December 22nd, 3 days before Christmas, Bobby Mitchell made an announcement at evening roll call. Christmas Eve, we're doing something special, real special. Major Gage has authorized a joint dinner. That means prisoners and guards all eating together outside. We're setting up tables in the yard. We're cooking barbecue Texas style. Brisket ribs, sausage beans, cornbread, the whole deal. There'll be music, maybe some dancing if y'all behave. And at midnight, we're gonna sing Silent Night together. Both languages, because that's what Christmas is supposed to be about. The prisoners stood in stunned silence. Now I know some of y'all are thinking this is weird. Mitchell continued. And yeah, it is. It's real weird to eat dinner with the enemy. But here's the thing. For one night we ain't enemies. We're just people. Just men far from home trying to remember what peace feels like. So show up. Don't show up. It's your choice. But I promise you, you'll regret missing it. That night, Carl couldn't sleep. He lay in his bunk thinking about Christmas Eve in Bavaria, about his mother's kitchen, about the church bells at midnight, about everything he'd lost and everything he'd somehow found here in this strange place. Carl? Ernst whispered. Are you going to the dinner? Yes. Me too. Are you scared? Ernst was quiet for a long time. Then, terrified. Because what if this changes us? What if we go home and we can't explain what happened here? What if we tell people that the Americans were kind and they call us liars or traitors, or worse? Then we lie, Carl said. We tell them we were tortured. We tell them we suffered. We give them the story they want to hear. But we'll know the truth. Yes, we'll know. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. And in the barracks of Camp Hearne, 4,000 German prisoners tried to sleep, each one wondering if they could survive one more surprise from the country that had defeated them with bread instead of bullets. 3 days until Christmas. 3 days until everything changed. December 23rd, 1944. The sky opened up at dawn, and rain hammered the camp for 3 straight hours, turning the yard into a mud pit and delaying the Christmas preparations. Carl stood under the barracks overhang with Ernst and Wolfgang, watching water pour off the roof in sheets. They'll cancel it, Wolfgang said. The dinner. They can't do barbecue in this weather. They won't cancel, Ernst replied. Americans don't cancel, they just adapt. He was right. By noon the rain had stopped, and crews of prisoners and guards were laying wooden planks across the muddy areas, setting up tents for cover, digging drainage ditches. Bobby Mitchell appeared wearing a poncho that made him look like a wet ghost. Y'all ready to work, or you planning to stand there looking pretty all day? They worked until sunset, constructing a framework of tables and benches that could seat over 500 people at once. The Americans brought out industrial grills, the kind used for feeding entire companies of soldiers. They stacked wood for fires. They strung more lights between poles, creating a canopy of illumination above the dining area. Lieutenant Stark supervised everything with a clipboard, and a perpetual expression of mild anxiety. "This has to be perfect," he kept saying. "Major Gage wants this perfect." Carl was hammering together a bench when a voice behind him said, "You're good at that." He turned. A prisoner he didn't recognize stood there, maybe 30 years old, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. His uniform indicated he'd been Luftwaffe Air Force. "Thank you." "Name's Otto Schneider. I flew Stukas before getting shot down over England. Spent 6 months in a camp near London before they shipped me here last month." He held out his hand. Carl shook it. "I heard about what you did, standing up to Vogel. News travels fast. In a camp always." Otto sat down on the partially finished bench. "I was in 3 camps before this one. 2 in England, 1 in Canada. Want to know the difference?" "What?" "In England, they were correct. Everything by the book. Geneva Convention to the letter. No abuse but no kindness either. Just procedure. In Canada, they were harsh. Not cruel, but hard. Made sure we knew we were prisoners. But here," he gestured around the camp, "here they're trying to prove something. I just can't figure out what." Carl sat down next to him. "That they're better than us. Maybe. Or maybe they're trying to prove it to themselves. That you can win a war without becoming the thing you're fighting. Do you believe that's possible?" Otto touched the scar on his face. "I got this when my plane crashed. British farmers found me in a field half dead, and they could have let me die. Could have beaten me. Could have done anything. But instead they carried me to their house and called for an ambulance. The old man gave me water while we waited. His son had died at Dunkirk. German bullets. And he still gave me water." Otto was quiet for a moment. "So yes, I believe it's possible. I've seen it." That night, Carl lay in his bunk thinking about Otto's story. About the British farmer who'd lost a son but still showed mercy. About Major Gage organizing a Christmas dinner instead of just maintaining order. About Bobby Mitchell bringing a dictionary as a gift. These small acts of kindness in the middle of massive violence. "You're thinking again," Ernst said from below. "I'm trying to understand." "Understand what?" "Why it matters. The dinner tomorrow. Why they're going to all this trouble for prisoners who'll be gone in 6 months anyway." Ernst rolled over. "Because symbols matter, Carl. Because somebody decided that even in war there are lines you don't cross. And feeding your enemy, treating them like humans, that's not weakness. That's strength. That's saying we can destroy you, but we choose not to, because we're better than that. That's arrogant. Maybe. But it's also effective. Every prisoner here will go home eventually and tell people what happened. That the Americans fed us, housed us, gave us Christmas. That's more powerful than any propaganda poster." Carl thought about his mother receiving his letters. About what she must be telling the neighbors. "My son is safe in America. They treat him well." And he imagined how that news spread person to person, family to family, undermining everything the Reich had said about the enemy. "We're weapons," he said quietly. "Even here, even fed and safe, we're still weapons, just pointed in a different direction. Does that bother you?" "I don't know." "Should it?" Ernst didn't answer. December 24th arrived cold and clear, the kind of winter morning that made everything look sharper, more defined. Carl woke before reveille and walked outside to see the Christmas setup in daylight. The tables formed a giant rectangle in the center of the yard. The grills were already smoking, tended by American cooks who'd started work at 4 in the morning. The smell of mesquite wood and meat filled the air. "Hell of a thing, isn't it?" Carl turned. Hector Ramirez stood behind him, wearing a clean shirt and a bolo tie. "You're here." "Course I'm here. Major Gage invited local folks who've been employing you boys. Figured it was right." Ramirez looked around the camp. "My granddaddy fought in the Civil War. Confederate side, though he didn't own slaves and didn't much care about the cause. Just got conscripted like most boys. He spent 8 months in a Union prison camp near Chicago. Camp Douglas, they called it. 4,000 men died there from disease and cold and starvation. He survived barely. Came home weighing 90 pounds. Ramirez paused. When I heard they were building POW camps in Texas, I thought, here we go again. But this is different. Why? Carl asked. Because somebody learned something. Somebody decided that treating prisoners like animals doesn't make you strong, it makes you cruel. And there's a difference. Work details were suspended for the day. The prisoners were allowed to shower shave and wear their cleanest uniforms. Some of the Americans had scrounged up extra clothing, better-fitting shirts and pants that didn't look like they'd been through 3 campaigns. At 1500 hours, Major Gage assembled everyone in the yard. Today is Christmas Eve, he began. For those of you who celebrate, it's a holy day. For everyone else, it's still a day to remember what connects us. Today we eat together. We sit at the same tables. We share food, not as captors and prisoners, but as men acknowledging each other's humanity. I know this is unusual. I know some of you are uncomfortable, but I'm asking you to try. For one evening, let's set aside the war and remember that we're all somebody's son, somebody's brother, somebody's father. The translator worked through the speech. Carl watched the faces of the other prisoners. Some looked moved, others skeptical. A few were crying. Dinner will be served at 1800 hours, Gage continued. Until then, you're free to walk the grounds, attend the chapel service. Lieutenant Stark is organizing, or rest. At 2200 hours, we'll have music and singing. At midnight, if the weather holds, we'll light a bonfire and observe a moment of silence for those who aren't here. For those who've fallen. For those still fighting. For those waiting at home. All of them. American and German alike. When he finished, nobody moved. The silence stretched out, fragile and strange. Then Ernst started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster. Other prisoners joined in. Not all of them, but enough. The sound echoed off the buildings, awkward and sincere. Carl found himself clapping too, though he wasn't sure why. Maybe because it felt right. Maybe because Major Gage looked embarrassed and pleased at the same time. Maybe because for once somebody had acknowledged that they were all trapped in the same terrible machinery and none of them had chosen it. The chapel service was held in the recreation hall at 1600 hours. Lieutenant Stark, who turned out to be the son of a Presbyterian minister, led it in English with a German-speaking prisoner translating. They sang hymns that worked in both languages. Oh, come all ye faithful. What child is this? Silent night. The harmonies were rough, but genuine men remembering words from childhood from before the war made them forget how to sing. Carl sat in the back with Ernst and Wolfgang. He wasn't religious, hadn't been since before his conscription, but something about the singing made his chest ache. It reminded him of church in Bavaria, of standing next to his father while his mother sang in her clear soprano, of believing the world made sense and God was watching and everything would be okay. Do you think God hears us? Wolfgang whispered. Even here. I don't know, Carl said. But I think the men next to us do, and maybe that's enough. At 1800 hours, the dinner began. The prisoners lined up at the grills where American cooks served them from huge platters of meat. Brisket that had been smoking for 12 hours. Pork ribs glazed with something sweet and spicy. Sausages that snapped when you bit into them. Beans cooked with bacon and molasses. Cornbread. Coleslaw. Potato salad. And at the end of the line, bottles of Coca-Cola and Dr. Pepper sitting in tubs of ice. Carl took his plate to one of the tables expecting to sit with other prisoners, but Bobby Mitchell waved him over to a table where several guards were already eating. Come on, Fritz. Plenty of room. Carl hesitated. Ernst pushed him forward. Go. I'll find my own trouble. He sat down. The guards nodded at him, made space, kept eating. For a minute, nobody spoke. Then the guard next to Carl, a corporal from Louisiana named James Trahan, said, You ever had real Texas barbecue before? No. Well, you're in for a treat. That brisket's been on since 4 this morning. Cooks from Lockhart, which is basically the barbecue capital of the world. Don't argue with me, it's a fact. Carl took a bite. The meat was so tender, it fell apart. The smoke flavor went all the way through. He'd never tasted anything like it. "Good, right?" Trahan grinned. "Wait till you try the ribs." They ate and talked about nothing important, about weather, about food, about a dog Trahan had back home that kept digging under the fence. Bobby Mitchell told a long, complicated story about his wife trying to bake a pie and accidentally using salt instead of sugar. The guards laughed. Carl found himself laughing too. Across the yard, similar scenes were playing out at other tables. Prisoners and guards sitting together passing food, attempting conversation in broken English and German. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward silences, misunderstandings, moments of tension when someone said the wrong thing. But mostly, there was just eating and talking, and the strange normality of sharing a meal. Hector Ramirez stopped by Carl's table. "Mind if I sit?" "Please." Ramirez settled onto the bench with a groan. "Getting too old for these wooden seats. Should have brought a cushion." He looked at Carl's plate. "You're not eating the ribs. What's wrong with the ribs?" "Nothing. I'm just overwhelmed." "Yes." Ramirez nodded. "I get that. This is a lot. But here's the thing, Carl. You're going to remember this night for the rest of your life. When you're old and the war's just a story, you tell your grandkids you're going to remember the Christmas you ate barbecue in Texas with the enemy. And they won't believe you. They'll think you're making it up. But you'll know it happened." "Will they hate me for it?" "My grandchildren." "Why would they hate you?" "Because I survived. Because I ate well while others died. Because I sat with Americans and laughed." Ramirez was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "My granddaddy, the one who survived Camp Douglas. He used to say that surviving isn't betrayal. That the dead don't want company. They want to be remembered. And you can't remember anybody if you're dead too." At 2,000 hours, someone brought out a guitar. Then a fiddle. Then a harmonica. American country music started up fast and energetic. Some of the guards started dancing, trying to teach prisoners the two-step. It was chaos. Men stumbling over each other's feet, laughing at their own incompetence. A few German prisoners who'd been musicians before the war asked to play, and soon there was a hybrid band, Americans and Germans trading off songs, neither side quite understanding the other's music but trying anyway. Carl stood at the edge of the dancing watching. Ernst appeared beside him with 2 bottles of Coca-Cola. "Drink this before it gets warm." "I don't dance." "Nobody said you had to. Just stand here and watch the world lose its mind." They stood together drinking Coke, watching prisoners and guards attempt to dance. Wolfgang appeared with a girl. Not a real girl, just a tall prisoner named Friedrich, wearing a makeshift dress made from a blanket. They were laughing so hard they could barely stand. "Is this real?" Carl asked. "Are we really standing here watching this?" "I don't know," Ernst said. "Maybe we died in Africa and this is heaven, or hell. I can't tell the difference anymore." At 2200 hours, the music stopped. Major Gage stood on a small platform that had been built near the largest fire. The entire camp gathered around prisoners and guards and local civilians, maybe 600 people in total. "Gentlemen," Gage began, "and ladies." He nodded at the 3 local women who'd helped with the cooking. "We're going to sing now. Silent Night, in both languages. At the same time. It won't be pretty, but it'll be honest. And sometimes honest is better than pretty." Lieutenant Stark handed out papers with the lyrics in German and English. The crowd formed a rough circle around the fire. Somebody counted down. 3, 2, 1. The singing started, ragged voices finding their way into the melody, 2 languages overlapping. But by the second verse, something changed. The harmonies started to align. The German Stille Nacht and the English Silent Night wove together, creating something neither language could do alone. Carl sang without thinking, his voice joining hundreds of others. Next to him, Bobby Mitchell was singing in English. Behind him, Ernst was singing in German. Across the fire, Hector Ramirez was singing with his eyes closed. And standing on the platform, Major Gage wasn't singing at all. He was just watching, his face unreadable. When the song ended, nobody spoke. The silence was complete except for the crackling of the fire and the wind moving through the camp. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, someone started crying. Not loud, just quiet, broken sobs. And then someone else. And another. Soon dozens of men were crying, guards and prisoners alike, all of them overwhelmed by something they couldn't name. Carl felt tears on his own face, but he didn't wipe them away. It felt wrong to hide them. Next to him, Ernst was crying too. Wolfgang was crying. Even Bobby Mitchell had tears running down his cheeks, though he was smiling at the same time. "Hell of a thing," Mitchell said, his voice rough. "Hell of a thing." At midnight, Gage called for the moment of silence. 600 men stood in the cold Texas night, heads bowed, each of them thinking about someone far away. Carl thought about his mother, about his father, about the friends who died in Africa, about the German soldiers still fighting in France and Russia and Italy, about the Americans who'd been killed by people like him, about all the useless, preventable death that had brought them to this moment. The silence lasted 2 minutes. When it ended, Gage simply said, "Thank you. Merry Christmas. Get some rest." The crowd dispersed slowly, people lingering, not wanting the night to end. Carl walked back to his barracks with Ernst and Wolfgang, none of them speaking. What was there to say? How could you describe what had just happened? How could you explain that for one night in the middle of a war that had killed millions, two enemies had sat down together and remembered what it meant to be human? Inside the barracks, men were already in their bunks, but nobody was sleeping. They were talking quietly, processing, trying to make sense of it. "That actually happened, right?" someone asked. "We didn't imagine it." "It happened," Ernst confirmed. "I have the barbecue sauce on my shirt to prove it." Carl climbed into his bunk and lay there staring at the ceiling. His stomach was full, his heart was full, his mind was spinning. He thought about Hermann Vogel in a camp in New Mexico, probably spending Christmas Eve trying to maintain his hatred, keeping the ideology alive. And he thought about how much harder that must be than simply admitting you'd been wrong. "Carl," Ernst whispered, "are you awake?" "Yes. When we go home, when this is over, we're not going to be able to tell people about tonight." "I know. They won't understand. They'll think we were weak, that we collaborated, that we forgot we were German." "I know. Does that bother you?" Carl thought about Bobby Mitchell's smile, about Hector Ramirez's words, about Major Gage standing on that platform watching 600 men sing together, about the taste of barbecue and the sound of two languages creating one song. "No," he said finally. "It doesn't bother me. Because we know the truth. And the truth is that tonight, for just a few hours, we were shown what the world could be if people tried harder to be decent. And maybe we can't tell anyone about it. Maybe we'll have to keep it secret for the rest of our lives. But we'll know. And that has to be enough." Outside, the fires were burning down to coals. The lights strung between the buildings swayed in the wind. And in Camp Hearne, Texas, on Christmas Eve 1944, 4,000 German prisoners slept with full bellies, and the memory of kindness they hadn't expected and didn't deserve and would carry with them forever. In a world built to teach them hatred, someone had offered them grace instead. And though none of them could articulate it yet, they understood that they'd witnessed something rare and precious, proof that even in war, even between enemies, humanity could still break through. Christmas morning came quiet and strange. Carl woke to sunlight streaming through the barracks window and the unfamiliar sound of men sleeping past reveille. Major Gage had suspended the morning roll call, given them this one day to rest. But Carl couldn't stay in bed. His mind was too loud, replaying the previous night on an endless loop. He dressed and walked outside. The yard still smelled of smoke and meat. The tables and benches stood empty now, streaked with morning dew. Someone had already started dismantling the decorations, carefully winding up the light strings, stacking the wooden frames. The evidence of the Christmas dinner was being packed away like it had never happened. Couldn't sleep either. Otto Schneider sat on the steps of the mess hall smoking a cigarette. He offered one to Carl. I don't smoke. Neither did I before the war. Otto took a long drag. Funny what changes when you're trying not to think. Carl sat down next to him. What are you trying not to think about? Everything. The dinner last night. What it means. What happens next. Otto flicked ash. I was shot down over Dover in 1942. Crashed in a field. Broke my back in 3 places. The British doctors put me back together even though I'd just bombed their city. Took them 4 months. When I could walk again, they sent me to a POW camp, then another, then here. And last night I ate dinner with my enemies, and it felt more real than anything I experienced in the Luftwaffe. That scares you. Terrifies me. Because if they're right and we're wrong, then what the hell did we die for? What did my brother die for? He was killed at Stalingrad, froze to death in a trench while waiting for orders that never came. And I'm here eating barbecue and singing Christmas carols with Americans. Otto's hand shook as he brought the cigarette to his lips. How do I go home and tell my mother that? Carl didn't have an answer. They sat in silence while the sun climbed higher and the camp slowly came to life around them. The next week passed in a blur of routine that felt different now. Work details resumed on December 26th. Carl returned to Hector Ramirez's farm, digging irrigation ditches in the winter cold. But something had shifted. The guards were friendlier. The other prisoners talked more openly. Even the hardcore Nazi sympathizers who'd escaped Vogel's purge seemed quieter, less certain. Bobby Mitchell drove the work truck one morning whistling a tune Carl recognized from Christmas Eve. You're in a good mood, Ernst observed from the truck bed. My wife wrote that Amy loved her Christmas presents, and she sent me cookies, oatmeal raisin. Sarah makes the best oatmeal raisin in Oklahoma, I swear on my life. Mitchell glanced in the rearview mirror. Y'all want some? I got more than I can eat. He passed the tin back. The prisoners stared at it like it might explode. Go on, Mitchell urged. They're just cookies. They won't bite. Ernst took one bit into it and his eyes widened. These are incredible. Told you, Sarah's got magic hands. Mitchell turned onto the dirt road leading to Ramirez's property. Hey, Fritz, you ever gonna tell me your real name? I can't keep calling you Fritz forever. Carl Weiss. Carl. That's good. I had a cousin named Carl. He was an asshole, but the name's fine. Mitchell grinned at his own joke. Well, Carl Weiss, from wherever you're from in Germany, welcome to another thrilling day of agricultural labor in scenic Robertson County, Texas. The work was hard, but familiar now. Carl had learned the rhythms of the farm, knew which tools to use, for which tasks understood when to push and when to rest. Ramirez treated him less like a prisoner and more like a hired hand. They talked while they worked, Carl's English improving week by week. You're getting good at this, Ramirez said one afternoon. They were repairing a section of fence that had been damaged by wild hogs. The language, I mean. You sound almost American now. That is not true. Okay, you sound like someone who learned English from Texans, which is its own kind of disaster. But you're getting there. Ramirez hammered in a fence post. What are you going to do when the war ends, when they send you home? Carl hadn't thought that far ahead. Home seemed like a concept from another lifetime. I will help my father, in the bakery. You any good at baking? I was before the war. I do not know now. It's like riding a bike. You don't forget. Ramirez wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cold. My son says the war might be over by summer. Says Germany's running out of everything. Fuel, ammunition, food, men. Says it's just a matter of time. Is he right? He's usually right about military stuff. Kid could have been an officer if he'd wanted. Too smart for his own good. Ramirez looked at Carl. How do you feel about that? About losing? Carl thought about Hermann Vogel's rage. About the ideology that demanded victory or death. about the propaganda that had promised a 1,000-year Reich. And he thought about Christmas Eve, about Bobby Mitchell's cookies, about this conversation he was having with a man whose son he might have killed in another timeline. "Relieved," he said finally. "I feel relieved." By January 1945 brought news that changed everything. The Battle of the Bulge had failed. Germany's last great offensive in the West had been crushed. The Red Army had crossed into Germany itself, advancing toward Berlin from the east. Italy was lost. France was lost. The Third Reich was collapsing like a house built on sand. In Camp Hearne, the prisoners gathered around radios in the recreation hall, listening to BBC broadcasts that the Americans allowed them to hear now. The news was devastating. Hamburg in ruins, Dresden firebombed, Berlin under constant aerial assault. The casualty numbers were staggering. "My mother lives in Hamburg," Wolfgang said, his voice hollow. "I haven't heard from her in 3 months." Nobody knew what to say. They'd all stopped receiving mail from home in December. The postal system had broken down as Germany's infrastructure crumbled. Letters sent weeks ago were lost somewhere in the chaos. Letters written now might never arrive. Carl wrote anyway. Every week he wrote to his mother, filling pages with descriptions of Texas and work and the weather and anything except the truth of what he was feeling. He wrote that he was safe, that he was well, that he would come home when he could. He wrote like she would read the letters, even though he knew they were probably piling up in some warehouse in New York, waiting for a postal route that no longer existed. "Why do you keep writing?" Otto asked one evening. He'd become something like a friend, a companion in confusion. "You know they're not getting through." "Because stopping means accepting she's gone, and I'm not ready to accept that." February brought a new influx of prisoners. These weren't the confident soldiers of 1943, or even the defeated but intact units of 1944. These were boys. 15, 16, 17 years old, conscripted from schools and farms, when Germany ran out of men. They arrived at Camp Hearne wearing uniforms that didn't fit, looking terrified and lost. Carl helped process one group, translating for Lieutenant Stark. The boys stood in ragged lines, shivering despite the Texas sun. One of them, a kid named Peter with red hair and freckles, couldn't stop crying. "I want to go home," Peter kept saying. "Please, I just want to go home." "You are home," Stark said gently through Carl's translation. "For now. This is as safe as you can be." They assigned Peter to Carl's barracks. That night the boy sat on his bunk, staring at nothing, still wearing his filthy uniform because he didn't know what else to do. Ernst brought him food from the mess hall. Wolfgang tried to talk to him, but Peter just sat there unreachable. "He's broken," Wolfgang whispered. "The war broke him before he even got here." "Then we help him heal," Carl said. "That's what we do now." It took 3 days before Peter spoke more than a few words. On the third night, he finally said, "They told us we'd be heroes, that we'd save the fatherland. That glory was waiting." But there was no glory, just mud and cold and bodies. So many bodies. "Where were you fighting?" Ernst asked. "I don't know. Somewhere in the West. They never told us. Just put us in trenches and said to wait. Then the Americans came and everyone ran. I ran too. I'm a coward." "You're alive," Carl said. "That's not cowardice. That's intelligence." Peter looked at him with eyes too old for his face. "What happens to us now?" "We wait. We work. We survive." And then... Carl couldn't answer that. None of them could. March brought spring to Texas and news of the Rhine River crossing. American forces had breached Germany's last natural defensive barrier. The war was entering its final phase. In Camp Hearne, the atmosphere shifted again. The prisoners were quieter now, withdrawn. Everyone was thinking about home, about what they'd find when they returned, about who would still be alive. Bobby Mitchell noticed the change. "Y'all are getting sad on me," he said one morning on the way to Ramirez's farm. "I don't like sad. Sad's contagious." "Our country is dying," Ernst said. "We're allowed to be sad." Your country's gonna be fine. It's the regime that's dying. There's a difference. Is there? When the regime is all we've known for 12 years. Mitchell was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When I was a kid, my daddy lost his farm in the Depression. Bank took it. Just came one day and said we had to leave. Everything we'd built, everything we'd worked for gone. And I remember asking him if we were gonna die now. And you know what he said? What? He said, 'Bobby, the land ain't gone. It's still there. It's just got different people on it. And we're still here. We're still us. Nothing can take that away unless we let it. So yeah, your regime's dying. Good riddance. But you're not your regime. You're just boys who got caught up in something bigger and meaner than you. And when this is over, you'll still be you. Maybe better versions if you're smart." Carl thought about that conversation for days. About identity and ideology and what remained when everything else was stripped away. He thought about who he'd been before the war. A baker's son who liked reading and didn't care about politics. And he thought about who he was now, a prisoner who spoke English and ate barbecue and had somehow survived when so many hadn't. April 12, 1945. President Franklin Roosevelt died. The news spread through Camp Hearne like wildfire. The American guards were stunned, grieving openly. Work details were suspended. Flags dropped to half-mast. That evening, Major Gage assembled the entire camp. "President Roosevelt is dead," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "He led this country through depression and war. He was our commander-in-chief. Whatever you thought of him, whatever your politics, he was a great man. We will observe 3 days of mourning. After that we continue, because that's what he would have wanted. We continue until the job is done." Carl watched the American guards that night, saw them sitting in small groups, talking quietly, some crying. He thought about how strange it was to mourn an enemy's leader. But Roosevelt hadn't felt like an enemy. The policies that brought prisoners to camps like Hearne, that insisted on treating them humanely, those had come from Roosevelt's administration. In a strange way, they owed him their lives. "Should we say something?" Wolfgang asked. "To the guards about Roosevelt. What would we say?" "I don't know. That we're sorry, that we understand." The next morning, Carl approached Bobby Mitchell. "I am sorry. About your president." Mitchell looked surprised. "That's kind of you, Carl. He was a good man, I think, from what I see. He was complicated. But yeah, he tried to be good. That counts for something." Mitchell lit a cigarette, hands shaking slightly. "You know what's funny? FDR never saw this camp. Never saw any of you. But his decisions put you here. His policies kept you alive. And now he's gone, and you're still here, and the war's almost over, and I don't know what any of it means anymore. Maybe it means we survived, and that was the point." Mitchell smiled weakly. "Maybe so, Carl. Maybe so." April 30th brought news that shook the camp to its foundation. Adolf Hitler was dead. Suicide in his bunker in Berlin. The Führer, the man who'd promised 1,000 years of glory, had killed himself rather than face defeat. The reaction among the prisoners was complicated. Some were relieved, others devastated. The true believers refused to accept it, claimed it was Allied propaganda. But most just felt numb. The war had been fought in his name, millions had died for his vision, and in the end, he'd taken the coward's way out. "He abandoned us," Otto said that night. "At the end, when it mattered, he abandoned his own people and killed himself. What kind of leader does that?" "The kind who never really cared about us," Ernst replied. "The kind who saw us as tools, not people. We were always expendable to him." Carl thought about Christmas Eve, about Major Gage acknowledging their humanity, about the Americans who'd made the choice over and over to treat prisoners as more than just enemies. And he thought about how Hitler's vision had required dehumanization, had depended on it, while the American vision insisted on the opposite. "We were wrong," he said quietly. "About everything. About who we were fighting for and why. We were wrong." Nobody argued. The truth was too obvious now. May 7, 1945. Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. Victory in Europe Day, they called it. VE Day. In Camp Hearne, the American guards celebrated with music and laughter, and probably some bootleg whiskey hidden somewhere. The prisoners sat in their barracks and tried to process what came next. "We can go home now, right?" Peter asked. He'd recovered somewhat over the past months, had learned to smile again. "The war's over. They have to send us home." "Eventually," Ernst said. "But not yet. There's no infrastructure, no ships available. Germany's in ruins. They can't just drop us in the middle of the rubble and say good luck. So we stay here. For now, yes." Carl walked outside and stood in the yard looking at the familiar buildings, the guard towers, the fence that had contained him for over 2 years. The war was over. He'd survived. Against all odds, against all probability, he'd survived. But he felt hollow. His country was destroyed. His mother's letters had stopped months ago. He had no idea if she was alive, if his father was alive, if the village still existed. He'd survived, but he didn't know what he'd survived for. Carl. Hector Ramirez stood at the gate. The guards had let him through. "Heard the news. Figured you boys might need a friendly face." "The war is over." "Yeah, hell of a thing." Ramirez walked over and stood next to him. "My son came home last week. Got discharged. He's fine. Little shrapnel in his leg, but he's fine. First thing he asked about was you. Wanted to know if the German prisoner who worked my farm had made it through." Why would he care? Because he met boys like you over there, in France and Germany. Prisoners who looked relieved to be captured, who were just trying to survive same as him. And he realized you're all just kids caught in something terrible. So yeah, he cares. We all do. Carl felt his throat tighten. "I do not know if my mother is alive." "I know. And that's the worst part. The waiting." Ramirez put a hand on Carl's shoulder. "But you'll find out, eventually. And whatever you find, you'll deal with it. Because that's what survivors do. They deal with it and they keep going." The summer of 1945 was strange and liminal. The war was over, but they were still prisoners. News from Germany was devastating. Millions dead. Cities destroyed. The full extent of the concentration camps was being revealed, photographs appearing in newspapers, testimony from survivors, detailing horrors beyond imagination. In Camp Hearne, the prisoners could barely speak about it. "Did we know?" Wolfgang asked one night. "Did we know what was happening?" "We knew something," Otto said. "Maybe not the details, but we knew Jews were disappearing. We knew there were camps. We knew, and we didn't ask questions because it was easier not to know." "That makes us complicit." "Yes, it does." The guilt was crushing. They'd fought for a regime that had committed atrocities they could barely comprehend. They'd worn the uniform, saluted the flag, believed the lies. And now they had to live with that. Bobby Mitchell found Carl sitting alone behind the barracks one evening in June. "You okay?" "No." "Fair enough." Mitchell sat down. "You heard about the camps, about what the Nazis did?" "Yes." "And you're wondering how to live with that, how to go home and face people knowing what was done in your name?" "Yes." Mitchell was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I don't have an answer for you, Carl. I wish I did. But I know this: you didn't do those things. You didn't run those camps. You were a soldier who got conscripted and did what he was told, and surrendered when he could. That doesn't erase what happened. But it doesn't make you personally responsible either." "How do I believe that?" "I don't know. But you're gonna have to figure it out. Because you're going home eventually. And when you do, you'll have a choice. You can let the guilt destroy you, or you can use it to build something better, to make sure it never happens again. That's all any of us can do." August 1945 brought news of atomic bombs dropped on Japan. The war in the Pacific was over too. The whole terrible conflict had finally ended. And in September, the first group of prisoners from Camp Hearne was scheduled for repatriation. Carl wasn't in the first group, or the second, or the third. The process was slow, organized by capture date and location. He wouldn't ship out until November. But he watched other prisoners leave, saw them board trucks with their few possessions heading to ports for the journey home. Some looked excited, most looked terrified. "What do you think we'll find?" Ernst asked. He was leaving in October, a month before Carl. "When we get back?" "I don't know. Rubble, hunger, guilt, maybe nothing at all." "That's cheerful?" "You asked." On Ernst's last day, they sat in the barracks together like they had for 2.5 years. Ernst had become like a brother to Carl. The thought of losing him was almost unbearable. "Promise me something," Ernst said. "When you get home, if you find your mother alive, you tell her about this place. You tell her about Christmas Eve and the barbecue and Bobby Mitchell and all of it. You tell her that even in war, people tried to be decent, because that's the only story worth remembering." "I promise." They shook hands. Ernst left the next morning. Carl stood at the fence and watched the truck disappear down the road, carrying away one more piece of the life he'd built here. November 15th, 1945. Carl's name finally appeared on the repatriation list. He had 3 days to prepare. He packed his few possessions, the German-English dictionary from Hector Ramirez, letters from his mother that had arrived before the postal system collapsed, a photograph of the Christmas Eve dinner that someone had taken, and copies had been distributed. That was it. 2.5 years reduced to objects that fit in a canvas bag. Bobby Mitchell drove him to the train station in Hearne on departure day. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? At the platform, Mitchell shook his hand. "Take care of yourself, Carl Weiss. You're a good man. Don't let anybody tell you different. Thank you. For everything. Just doing my job." "No. You were doing more than your job. You were being human. There's a difference." Mitchell's eyes got shiny. "Well, hell, Carl. You're gonna make me cry, and I got a reputation to maintain." He stepped back. "Go on now. Go home. Rebuild. Live a good life. That's the best revenge against everything that tried to destroy you." The train took Carl to New York. The ship took him across the Atlantic. On December 3, 1945, exactly 2 years and 9 months after he'd arrived at Camp Hearne, Carl Weiss stepped onto German soil. What he found there would stay with him forever. The destruction, the hunger, the grief. His mother was alive, barely living in a single room because their house had been bombed. His father had died during an air raid in 1944. The bakery was rubble. The village was a ghost of itself. But he was home, and he was alive. And he carried with him the memory of a Christmas Eve in Texas, when enemies had become human beings, when kindness had broken through hatred, when someone had decided that even in war, decency mattered. Freedom had come, though not the way anyone had imagined. Not with triumph or glory, but with exhaustion and sorrow, and the slow, painful work of rebuilding. And for Carl Weiss, and 4,000 other German prisoners, who'd been shown humanity when they deserved only justice, freedom meant carrying forward the lessons learned in a Texas prison camp, that you could win a war without losing your soul, that treating enemies with dignity was strength, not weakness, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act was simply being kind. The rubble of Bavaria in December 1945 looked nothing like the Texas plains Carl had left behind. Where Camp Hearne had been flat and open, Germany was broken and vertical buildings standing in jagged half-forms like rotted teeth. Where Texas had been warm, even in winter, Bavaria was frozen, the kind of cold that went through clothes and skin and settled in your bones. Where Camp Hearne had smelled of mesquite smoke and possibility, Germany smelled of ash and endings. Carl's mother cried when she saw him. Not happy tears, though there was happiness in them. These were the tears of someone who'd given up hope and had it unexpectedly returned. She held him for a long time in the doorway of the single room that was now her home, her whole body shaking. "I thought you were dead," she kept saying. "I thought you were dead." "I'm here, Mama. I'm here." Inside the room was smaller than his barracks space at Camp Hearne. A bed, a table, a chair, a stove that barely worked. She'd hung a photograph on the wall, the only one that had survived Carl's father standing in front of the bakery, smiling, his apron dusted with flour. Carl stared at the photograph and felt his chest collapse. When? March 1944. An air raid. He was trying to put out a fire at the neighbor's house. A wall fell. His mother's voice was flat, rehearsed. She'd told this story before. "He didn't suffer. That's what they told me. I don't know if it's true." Carl sat down at the table. His father was dead. The bakery was gone. The village he'd known was unrecognizable. He'd survived the war only to return to a graveyard. "Tell me about where you were," his mother said. "Your letters stopped coming in December last year. I didn't know if you were alive or if the letters were just lost or if something had happened." Carl pulled out the photograph from his canvas bag. The Christmas Eve dinner. Hundreds of men sitting at tables, guards and prisoners mixed together, the lights strung overhead like stars. His mother studied it, confused. "Where is this?" "Texas, a prisoner camp called Hearne. They let you celebrate Christmas." "They didn't just let us. They organized it. They cooked for us. American soldiers and German prisoners eating together." His mother touched the photograph like it might dissolve. "This can't be real." "It's real, Mama. They treated us well. Better than we deserved. Better than we treated our prisoners. They fed us 3 meals a day. They paid us for work. They gave us beds and medical care and dignity." Why would they do that? Carl thought about Bobby Mitchell's words, about Major Gage's principles, about the choice to see prisoners as human beings instead of just enemies. Because they believed it was right. Because they thought treating us well would prove something about who they were. And did it? Yes, it proved they were better than us. His mother set the photograph down. Don't say that. Why not? It's true. We started the war. We invaded other countries. We committed atrocities. And when we were defeated, they could have done to us what we did to them. But they didn't. That makes them better. You sound like you're grateful to them. I am grateful. I'm alive because of them. I learned English because of them. I remembered what it meant to be human because of them. Carl leaned forward. Mama, you don't understand what it was like. We expected torture and starvation and death. Instead, we got kindness. It broke something in me. Or maybe it fixed something. I don't know anymore. They sat in silence while the weak stove struggled to heat the room. Outside, someone was shouting about bread rations, the sound of post-war Germany constant negotiation over scraps. Over the next weeks, Carl tried to rebuild. He found work clearing rubble, the only job available for returning soldiers. 10 hours a day lifting broken bricks and twisted metal, trying to make space for whatever came next. The pay was almost nothing. Food was scarce. The black market thrived while the official economy barely functioned. He ran into Ernst in January 1946. They were both working the same rubble-clearing crew in Munich, 40 miles from Carl's village. Ernst looked thinner, older, haunted. You made it back, Ernst said. So did you. My family's gone, all of them. My wife, my daughter, my parents. Bombs. The house took a direct hit in February 1945. They didn't suffer, they tell me. But how would they know? Carl didn't have words. What could you say to someone who'd lost everything? I keep thinking about Camp Hearne, Ernst continued. About Christmas Eve. About how we sang together and ate together, and for a few hours we were just people. And then I come back here and everyone's angry and broken and looking for someone to blame. And I want to tell them what I saw. That there's another way. That you don't have to meet cruelty with cruelty. But they don't want to hear it. Why not? Because it's easier to hate. Because if they admit the Americans were decent, then they have to confront what we did. What we supported. What we allowed to happen. Ernst picked up a brick, turned it over in his hands, set it down. I'm thinking about going back. To America. Yes. They're allowing immigration now. Not many, but some. For people with skills with sponsors. Hector Ramirez wrote to me. Said if I wanted to come to Texas, he'd sponsor me. Said he could use a teacher, that the schools there need good people. Carl felt something twist in his chest. Jealousy, hope. He couldn't tell. You'd leave Germany. What's left here for me? Everyone I loved is dead. The country's divided between the Allies and the Soviets. We're going to be occupied for decades. And I'm tired, Carl. I'm so tired of carrying this guilt of walking past people who look at me and know I wore the uniform. In America, I could start over. I could be someone who wasn't part of this. You can't escape what we were. No. But I can choose what I become. Ernst left for Texas in March 1946. Carl helped him pack the single suitcase that held everything he owned. At the train station, they shook hands one last time. Come visit, Ernst said. When you can. When things are better. Come see what we can build when we try. I will. But Carl knew he wouldn't. Not for a long time. He had to stay. Had to help his mother. Had to try to make sense of what remained. The years passed slowly. Carl rebuilt the bakery with his own hands, brick by brick, using skills he'd learned from his father and money he'd saved from years of rubble work. It took until 1949 to reopen. The first loaves came out of the oven on a Tuesday morning in April, and the smell of fresh bread filled the village for the first time since the war. His mother cried again. Different tears this time. Your father would be proud. Carl thought about his father. About the man who taught him to knead dough, to judge the temperature of the oven by feel, to understand that baking was both art and science. And he thought about how his father had never known about Camp Hearne, about Texas, about the Christmas Eve that had changed everything. I hope so, Mama. I hope so. In 1952, Carl married a woman named Anna, who'd lost her first husband at Stalingrad. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl. He taught them to bake. He taught them English. And when they were old enough to understand, he told them about Texas. Why did the Americans treat you so well? His son asked. He was 12, skeptical, unable to imagine kindness from enemies, because they believed that how you treat your enemies defines who you are, that you can win a war without losing your humanity. But we were the bad guys. Carl paused. His children knew the truth. They'd learned in school about the Holocaust, about the atrocities, about the evil that had been committed in Germany's name. They carried that knowledge like a weight. Yes, he said finally. We were. Our leaders, our soldiers, our people. We did terrible things. Things that can never be forgiven or forgotten. But the Americans looked at us and saw past the uniform to the person underneath. They saw scared boys who'd been lied to and manipulated and used, and they chose mercy. Was that right? To show you mercy when you didn't deserve it? I don't know. I've spent 20 years thinking about that question, and I still don't know. But I know this, their mercy changed me. It made me want to be better, to build instead of destroy, to teach my children a different way. His daughter, 9 years old and sharp as a knife, asked, Do you miss it, Texas? Every day. In 1965, Carl received a letter from Bobby Mitchell. It had taken months to find him pass through various addresses before landing at the bakery. The envelope was thin, the paper inside covered in Mitchell's familiar scrawl. Dear Carl, I hope this letter finds you. I've been trying to track down some of the boys from Camp Hearne, wanting to know what happened to everyone. I found Ernst in San Antonio. He's teaching at a high school there, married with 3 kids. He told me how to find you. I'm retired now. Spent 20 years in the Army after the war, finally hung up the uniform in 1963. Sarah and I are back in Oklahoma. Amy's grown, married, gave us grandkids. Time moves fast. I think about Christmas Eve 1944 a lot. About all you boys and how scared you were, and how we tried to show you that Americans could be decent even in war. I wonder if it mattered. If it changed anything. Ernst says it did. He says it changed him. Did it change you, I'm asking, because I'm writing a book. About Camp Hearne. About what we tried to do there. About the experiment of treating prisoners like human beings and what came from it. I want to include your story if you're willing. Want people to know that even in the middle of terrible violence, there were moments of grace. Let me know if you're interested. And if you're ever in Oklahoma, you come visit. Sarah makes the best oatmeal raisin cookies in the world. That hasn't changed. Your friend Bobby Mitchell Carl read the letter 3 times. Then he sat down and wrote back. He wrote about the bakery, about his family, about the years of rebuilding, and he wrote about Christmas Eve, about how it had stayed with him, how it had shaped everything that came after. He wrote about learning that kindness was strength and cruelty was weakness, and how those lessons had taken root in the Texas dirt and grown into something he carried forever. Bobby's book came out in 1968. Barbecue and Barbed Wire, An American Experiment in Humanity. It sold modestly, mostly to libraries and historians, but it told the story. It preserved the memory, and it made the case that how you treat your enemies in war reveals who you really are. Carl bought 3 copies, one for himself, one for each of his children. In the margins he wrote notes, corrections, additional memories. He wanted them to know the full story. Not just the sanitized version, but the complicated truth that he'd been a soldier in an evil regime, that he'd participated in an unjust war, and that the enemy had shown him mercy he didn't deserve, and in doing so had given him a chance at redemption. In 1974, Camp Hearne was demolished. The land was sold to developers who built a shopping center where the barracks had stood. Bobby Mitchell sent Carl a photograph of the empty lot before construction began. On the back he'd written, "They can tear down the buildings, but they can't tear down what happened here." Carl framed the photograph and hung it in the bakery next to his father's picture. Customers asked about it sometimes. He told them it was a prison camp in Texas where he'd been held during the war. Most nodded and moved on. A few asked questions. Those who asked got the full story, the barbecue, the singing, the kindness that had broken through hatred. "Why tell people?" Anna asked one night. "It's over. The war's been done for 30 years. Why not just let it rest?" Because forgetting is dangerous. People need to know what happened. Not just the bad parts, though those are important, but also the good parts. The moments when people chose to be better than the circumstances required. Those stories matter too. Maybe they matter most. In 1984, Carl received an invitation. A reunion was being planned. Former guards and former prisoners from Camp Hearne gathering in Robertson County, Texas, to commemorate the 40th anniversary of Christmas Eve, 1944. Bobby Mitchell was organizing it. Ernst would be there. Hector Ramirez's son, now retired from the Army, would attend. They wanted Carl to come. He was 70 years old. The trip would be expensive. He didn't fly well anymore. Anna worried about his heart. But he went anyway. He had to. Texas in December looked different from how he remembered. The camp was gone, replaced by parking lots and strip malls. But the land was the same. The flat horizon, the endless sky, the quality of light that made everything seem possible. 43 people attended the reunion. Former prisoners, now old men with grandchildren. Former guards, gray-haired and stooped. They gathered in a community center in Hearne, and for an afternoon, they were young again, transported back to that impossible Christmas Eve when enemies had become friends. Bobby Mitchell was there, 72 years old still, with that easy grin. "Carl Weiss, look at you, got old on me." "You too." They embraced. 2 old men who'd been on opposite sides of a fence holding each other like brothers. Ernst was there with his American wife and 3 grown children who spoke English with Texas drawls. "I told them about Christmas Eve," Ernst said. "About the barbecue and the singing. They think I'm exaggerating." "We're not exaggerating," Bobby said. "We're just old and nostalgic and trying to make sense of what we lived through." They spent the afternoon telling stories. About the camp, about the work details, about the small moments of connection that had accumulated into something bigger. They talked about prisoners who'd died after returning to Germany, about guards who'd been killed in the Pacific. They talked about the years of rebuilding, about the Cold War that had turned former enemies into allies. They talked about everything except the Holocaust, because that wound was still too deep, too complicated, too much. At sunset, they drove out to where Camp Hearne had stood. Nothing remained except a historical marker placed there by the county. It read, Camp Hearne, 1943 to 1945. German POW camp. 800 prisoners held here. Known for humane treatment and the Christmas Eve dinner of 1944, when guards and prisoners ate together in a gesture of common humanity. Carl stood in front of the marker for a long time. Behind him, the other survivors gathered. Someone started singing. Silent Night. First in English, then in German, the two languages weaving together just like they had 40 years ago. The voices were older now, cracked and uncertain. But the harmony held. When the singing stopped, Bobby Mitchell said, "We did something good here. In the middle of all that evil, all that killing, we did something good. And it mattered. Not because it changed the outcome of the war, but because it changed us. All of us. It proved that decency isn't weakness," Ernst added. "That you can be strong and kind at the same time. That how you treat your enemies defines your character." Carl thought about his children back in Bavaria, about the bakery that had risen from rubble, about the life he'd built on the foundation of lessons learned in a Texas prison camp, about second chances and mercy and the power of treating people like human beings, even when everything in the world told you not to. "It proved more than that," he said quietly. "It proved that hatred isn't inevitable, that even after years of propaganda and violence, people can still recognize each other's humanity, that it's possible to build bridges instead of walls, to offer food instead of punishment, to sing together instead of kill each other." "You think people will remember?" Bobby asked. 100 years from now, will anyone care about a Christmas dinner in a prison camp? Carl looked at the historical marker, at the flat Texas land stretching in every direction, at the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and red. "I don't know, but we remember, and we'll tell our children and they'll tell theirs, and maybe that's enough. Maybe the point isn't whether everyone remembers, but whether someone does. Whether the story survives to remind future generations that kindness is always possible, even in the darkest times." They stood there until the sun disappeared and the stars came out. The same stars that had watched over Christmas Eve 1944. The same stars that had seen empires rise and fall, wars begin and end, hatred bloom and wither. The stars that bore witness to both humanity's worst and its best, indifferent and eternal. Carl returned to Bavaria in January 1985. He brought back photographs from the reunion stories to share with his grandchildren, and a renewed sense that his life had meaning. That surviving the war hadn't been an accident or a betrayal, but an opportunity. A chance to testify to the possibility of redemption. He died in 1992 at the age of 78. His children found the Christmas Eve photograph in his desk, along with Bobby Mitchell's letters, Ernst's address in San Antonio, and a worn German-English dictionary with Hector Ramirez's name written inside the cover. They found his notes in the margins of Barbecue and Barbed Wire, his additions to the story, his insistence on accuracy and truth. At his funeral, his son read from a letter Carl had written, but never sent, dated December 24, 1984, the 40th anniversary of the dinner. "I have spent my life trying to understand what happened that night in Texas. How enemies became human beings. How hatred was overcome by generosity. How a simple meal changed everything. I think I finally understand. It wasn't magic. It wasn't destiny. It was choice. People chose to be kind when they could have been cruel. They chose to build bridges when they could have built walls. They chose to see the person instead of the uniform. And in doing so, they proved that even in the darkest times, even in the middle of unthinkable violence, humanity can prevail. Not always, not easily, but possibly. And possibility is all we need to keep trying. Today, the shopping center still stands where Camp Hearne used to be. The historical marker remains, though vandals damaged it in 2003, and it had to be repaired. A small museum in Robertson County preserves artifacts, photographs, letters, a worn mess kit. Bobby Mitchell's manuscript. Every December on Christmas Eve, a handful of people gather there to remember. Children and grandchildren of prisoners and guards. Historians, local residents, people who believe the story matters. They tell the story of the Christmas dinner, of barbecue and singing and enemies eating together, of Major Gage's principles and Bobby Mitchell's cookies and Carl Weiss's journey from soldier to prisoner to baker to witness. They tell the story because it's true, and because truth is the only weapon against forgetting. The camp was built with fear and surrounded by wire. But what happened there transcended those limitations. What happened there proved that human beings are capable of extraordinary grace even toward those they've been taught to hate. What happened there showed that the choice to be decent is always available, always meaningful, always worth making. They built it as a prison. But it became a classroom where enemies learned to be human together. And though the buildings are gone and most of the witnesses are dead, the lesson remains that how we treat those who cannot defend themselves, those who are at our mercy, those who we have every reason to hate, that reveals who we truly are. And in that Texas prison camp in December 1944, Americans chose to be remembered for their humanity rather than their victory. They chose kindness over cruelty, mercy over vengeance, hope over hatred. And in doing so, they changed the world. One meal, one song, one act of unexpected grace at a time. If you believe these names deserve to be remembered, if you believe this story needs to be told, share it. Write the name of someone in your life who chose kindness when cruelty would have been easier. Write it in the comments. Let their name be remembered. Because memory is how we honor the best of what humans can be. Memory is how we resist the worst. Memory is how we ensure that the lessons learned on a cold Christmas Eve in Texas, when enemies sang together under an infinite sky, continue to echo forward into whatever future we're building. Remember Camp Hearne. Remember Christmas 1944. Remember that grace is always possible, always powerful, always worth the risk. Remember.